mortality, we must address pregnancy-related conditions as well as other health conditions that affect women throughout their lives, including during pregnancy. I'm saying this because what's happening is many women are suffering chronic conditions which they need treatment. Then they get pregnant and they need to continue to be treated, but the health provider does not know how to treat. Why? You would think that a pregnant woman is the same as a woman, but no, there are huge differences in the body of a pregnant woman and a non-pregnant woman. So these differences, these physiological changes that the woman suffers during pregnancy can have an impact in the absorption, in the distribution, metabolism, and elimination of certain medicines. So basically, if you look at the maternal blood volume, it's 40% more than a non-pregnant woman. This means that the exposure to a drug in a pregnant woman will be different than in a non-pregnant woman. And there is related the safety and the efficacy. So medicines should be tested in pregnant women to understand how physiological changes affect the efficacy and the safety. So without the evidence-based data, health providers cannot accurately assess the risks or the benefits of a prescribed medication during pregnancy. So this is why we need clinical trials and to be conducted, including pregnant women. However, what we know is that what's happening, pregnant women are not included in the clinical trials. However, we also know that 70% more or less of the pregnant women at some point, they will receive a medication, but this medication is off-label. This means that if you look at the indication in the prospect, you will not see that it's indicated for pregnancy. What happens is that the responsibility for treating this pregnant woman relies on the health provider and on the woman too. The woman has to accept to be treated with something that we don't have data for. So excluding pregnant women from clinical trials may pose actually greater risks than including them in the clinical trials. So what we did at WHO, we looked at the ICTRP. This is the International Clinical Trials Registry Platform, where all the clinical trials are registered. And we look at those trials that they were testing an intervention that could be used in a woman. And we found that only 4% of these trials registered in this platform included pregnant women, only 4%. Then I said, no, this is not possible. So let's look now at phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. And I'm sure that I will find more pregnant women included at least in phase 3. But again, you see the blue bars are very low. So pregnant women are not included in the clinical trials. And then I didn't want to put my arms down. I said, no, well, now look at the non-communicable diseases. Let's see what happens with the clinical trials in NCDs. I'm sure there we need to have pregnant women included. And again, look at the blue bar in the figure down. Again, it's very, very low. And what happened in COVID, it's a good example. It's a concrete example of the situation. So in COVID, we knew that pregnant women had higher risks of morbidities related to the infection. But if you look at all the clinical trials registered during the period of COVID, only 75% excluded pregnant women. And actually, what we needed was to know if the vaccines were protective for in pregnancy. So there are several barriers that prevent pregnant women to be included in clinical trials. And I only put 3 points. One is the perceived low profitability. So pregnant women are often seen as less profitable market. Why? You are pregnant only if everything goes well for 9 months. So the developers need to develop a drug that will include only for 9 months this woman. It's not profitable for them. Liability too. They prefer to say, no, because of liability, we will not include them. But actually what they are doing is shifting the liability onto the health provider or the woman itself. Then we have also research capacity challenges. So IRBs, ethical review boards, scientists often lack expertise in maternal health. They have limited understanding of these differences in the body of a pregnant woman versus a woman that I was referring before. And then we also have the pregnant women that they have limited decision-making power. In many countries, they don't have a decision-making power. And these women are not considered patients. So why to include them in a clinical trial? So all this results in unethical practices, delays in effective intervention, wasted resources, and loss of public trust in research. So there is a need for a global shift towards more inclusive research. We have to protect pregnant women through ethical research and not from research. We have to count women to generate high-quality evidence-based data. We have to study women through quality research. We have to include women and care for women to have guidelines, clinical guidance. And we need to invest in women to accelerate progress, achieving universal health coverage. So driving this global shift demands coordinated action from multiple stakeholders. I think we started doing something good. There are already several institutions, organizations working in this area. So within WHO, we have different departments, disease departments, already trying to ensure the inclusion of pregnant women. Also, we have MMV, we have Concept Foundation, we have the NDI, even we have the International Council of Harmonization looking at how to include pregnant women in clinical research. But what we need now is to work together, to collaborate, because otherwise we will not be able to achieve anything. So I like Rosalind Franklin's quote that says that science and everyday life cannot and should not be separated. So let's work together in a collaborative way with this life course approach to ensure that pregnant women are indeed included in clinical trials properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Really, a really sobering perspective on what's currently there, but also an optimistic perspective on where we can go. And while we also know that women are pregnant each time, only 9 months, some of us have spent a lot of time pregnant, there also are these chronic conditions where if you interrupt your care at a certain point, you will find yourself in terrible conditions. I know that my colleague Agnès is working in pregnancy and clinical trials in cancer. There are other areas in pain medication, there are other things. And so this is really not only the moment of pregnancy, but the moment of being a citizen who may become pregnant and therefore absolutely needs to have this kind of care. So thank you very much for this. Okay, so also to take a look now at what the overall global landscape before we get to our virtual and panel. Yeah, please do come in. I'll stop for just a second because there's more people arriving. Everything stops in Geneva in the rain. Has anyone noticed that? Like the taxis don't work, the buses don't work, your shoes don't work, and it takes forever to get anywhere. So voila. And it's even worse in the snow. You'd think the Swiss had never seen snow before in Geneva. Okay, so allow me to introduce Cécile Ventola. Cécile is a senior technical officer at Impact Global Health. Her research is focused on topics including contraception, intersections of gender and health, gender-affirming healthcare, organizational factors of health equity and sexual and menstrual health. And please, Cécile, she's going to speak to us about the funding landscape for health R&D during pregnancy and lactation.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here with Impact Global Health. As an organization, what we do is we collect data on R&D for global health issues so that we can provide funders, decision makers, advocates with a little bit more of an understanding of what is going on. And we have a huge interest in women's health and maternal health as well. So the idea is for me to give you some data points to sort of set the scene, know what we're dealing with a bit more before we dive into the panel discussion. Okay, it's not showing up here. The remote control. Okay, thank you. Even better. So first of all, we have a big part of our data production is the GFinder survey. So it's a survey among private and public funders of R&D for global health issues. And we've been conducting that survey since 2007. So we have extensive data for the past 15 years of what has been funded by whom, basically, for a range of global health issues. We recently, last October, published a report specifically on the inclusion of pregnant and lactating women in clinical research. And so we looked at our data for that. And over the last 15 years, looked how many of these of the research projects that were funded of the grants were actually including pregnant women. And we found that beautiful number of 0.3%, which is then $75 million among the almost 23 billion that was spent in the last 15 years. So this is for neglected diseases and emerging infectious diseases. It was not only limited in funding, but also in how many conditions were covered. So our scope for neglected diseases and emerging infectious diseases has 47 conditions, and only 8 of them had some research conducted, including pregnant women, which is very limited. We also took a closer look at clinical trials for 3 conditions that have a specific burden for pregnant women, which are HIV, malaria, and Zika, for the same time period. And there we found that only 2% of the clinical trials conducted for these conditions included pregnant women. Most of them were for malaria and HIV. There was actually no clinical trial conducted on Zika that included pregnant women, despite us knowing the very specific burden of that condition for pregnant women. So it looks like this status quo is very much one of exclusion, massively. What we also saw in that report was that when they are included, pregnant women tend to be included in late-stage research, if not post-registration studies. So it feels like they're a bit of an afterthought. That also explains the delay sometimes between the moment a drug comes to the market and when we do have safety data for pregnant women. We actually don't have that data for 98% of the drugs that are available, which, as was presented before, means the risk then is just for the woman to decide for herself without the accurate information. So this is for neglected diseases and emerging infectious diseases. We also have some data on another way to look at this, which is pregnancy-specific condition. So we started collecting data on what we call sexual and reproductive health. We include maternal health within that umbrella. We started in 2018. So here you've got the trend for the last 6 years, and you can compare the 2 maternal health conditions that we included at the time, preeclampsia and postpartum hemorrhage, which are very much at the bottom. And where you see that we're very far from what is being spent for STIs, contraception, or HPV. So much so that over these 6 years, there's only 6% of that global funding for SRH that went to maternal health. Last year in 2023, we actually included 2 additional maternal health conditions, so preterm labor and maternal iron deficiency anemia, which brought the total for maternal health for 2023 up to 86 million. And as you can see here, that's still well below any other condition in the scope. The consequences of both the reluctance to include pregnant women in clinical research and this very low level of funding for pregnancy-specific conditions are to be seen in the health of the pipeline, for example. So we do have an extensive pipeline covering products in use and in development for a lot of pregnancy-related conditions. We actually developed that within the Accelerating Innovation for Mothers project with the Concept Foundation. And one characteristic of that pipeline is that there's a very high proportion of repurposed medicines that is being used in the absence of actually innovative research with new chemical entities being developed specifically for these conditions. Researchers and clinicians are trialing and using drugs that were developed for different conditions. That has an impact in terms of efficacy, of course, with a lot of use off-label, which was also mentioned. That also has an impact on how much we know about these conditions, because it's not specific research that is being conducted. So at the end of the day, we don't know a lot. For example, with preeclampsia, there's still a lot of questions around that issue. So this is a bit of a green picture that I'm painting, but at least we know where we start from, and we know which point we want to move away from as quickly as possible. And I think a lot of initiatives helping with that are going to be part of the panel discussion.
Joining us. So if there's anyone else who needs to come in, is that everybody? Please allow people to come in if necessary. Okay, so now we're going to do a hybrid panel. sometimes this is brilliant, and sometimes we have technical problems that nobody anticipated. So here's fingers crossed for the this is brilliant. And I would, let's see. Katja, do I need to do anything to bring people up, or what? I mean, other than, yeah, for the, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask our three our present panelists, Miriam, Alexandra, and Metin, if you can just come up at least, while we're putting people onto the panel. Okay, so if I can please ask Maureen and Ian virtually to please turn on your screens. Let's see if that works, and see if we, through the magic of technology, we have Kenya and Uganda joining us, perhaps. Tell me. So Maureen and Ian, if you're able to turn on your screens. Voila, this is the part. Whenever someone says to me, would you please moderate a joint panel? I'm like, how good are your tech people? And is it raining out? Okay, we'll see. Give me one more moment. Okay. So we're going to run a little bit over if we do this, but allow me to do the following. Tu les envoies un message maintenant? OK. Moi, je prends des questions pour 2 minutes. OK, d'accord? OK. So this is a little bit off the running of the panel, but while I have you, rather than singing karaoke to you, which would be torture, are there any specific questions or comments from the panel at this moment? I mean, excuse me, from the audience for the, yes, please. And would you introduce yourself, please?
That they have to be the subject, the center, and the whole decision maker. So when we go to this research, I was thinking of the 3 times I've been pregnant, I would have been very reluctant to be part of research on medicine. So I find the ethical aspect very strong.
Yes.
And I felt it was like, yeah, maybe there is also let's say a profit mobile. But the profit mobile, if I looked at the statistics, I have a practical question. Of course, a lot more is put into the sexually transmitted diseases, but they affect far more people than preeclampsia. So if you looked at the proportions, would it then be more regular? You see that?
Yes, in terms of burden of disease, yes, or condition.
Sexuality and reproduction, which means that everything that allows for free sexuality is more important and attracts more money than the reproduction. So it's also something of our own doing.
Excellent. Okay. So let me just do 2 things for here first. Let's see if we have our panelists here. Do we have, est-ce qu'on, les deux sont là? They're both there. Okay, excellent. Okay. So I know for certain that right now the panelists who are there can speak about the ethical issues associated with clinical trials, the burden associated with women and preeclampsia and other kinds of things. So perhaps in the course of this panel now, these will be addressed. If they're not specifically addressed, I will give the plug right now that we have time afterwards for at least a majority of you to please stay and to have these kinds of conversations and questions answered, because these come up frequently in this area of technical work. Okay, so Ian, you're there, and excellent. Okay, so voila. Thank you very much for that question, and we'll now start. Okay, so let me introduce the panel to you now. We have here Maureen Marenga. Is it possible to make them large here on the... Okay, so the slides can be removed. I don't think we have slides for the rest of the panelists. Okay, all right, let me see. Is it possible to... C'est possible? Ah, wait, yes, okay, very good. Very good. There we go. Okay. Thank goodness we have an active audience, or I would just be wandering around. Okay, so let me introduce first Maureen Marenga, who's a prominent community advocate dedicated to advancing the health and human rights of women and girls. In 2008, she founded an organization in Kenya, her native country, to support access to health services for women and girls, and has since held many influential roles in global health organizations. Maureen, it's a pleasure to meet you virtually, and I hope to meet you in person at some point soon. And I'd like to now introduce also Alexandra Calmy, who is a professor at the University Hospitals of Geneva, where she leads the HIV/AIDS unit and Center for Clinical Research. She's involved with WHO in developing and implementing guidelines for HIV/AIDS treatment in low and middle income countries. Metin Golmezoglu, who is one of my heroes in global health, who currently serves as an advisor at the Concept Foundation after stepping down as its executive director in March 2025. And for many years before that, you were at WHO. It's not here in your mat. Metin is a medical doctor, researcher who has conducted large studies and trials in key interventions to improve maternal and perinatal health. My dear friend Miriam El Galwood, who is a senior director at Medicines for Malaria Venture, where she's taught me half of what I know about things associated with women in pregnancy and certainly in drug development. She oversees drug development strategies and co-leads the Malaria in Mothers and Babies initiative, also known as MIMBA. She brings over 20 years of experience in drug development across various therapeutic areas. And finally, but certainly not last, Ian Mugusia, excuse me, Ian, Mugisa, thank you, forgive my pronunciation faux pas, is a regulatory office at the Uganda National Drug Authority, and he's an experienced clinical trial reviewer and a GCP, Good Clinical Practices Inspector, as well as a dental surgeon, and has contributed to Uganda's recent clinical trials guidelines. So welcome to all the panelists. So Maureen, I'm going to start with you, if I can. In 2023, you co-signed the Community Consensus Statement on the earlier inclusion of pregnant and lactating women in TB research. So remember, we're talking about all forms of diseases in which women may, in fact, have these diseases. When it comes to the inclusion of pregnant and lactating women in TB research, what is the ask from the communities that you represent?
Thank you very much. I stand in the protocols already set, and I want to thank everyone who has supported inclusion of women, pregnant and breastfeeding women in TB treatment research. So as a community advocate representing women affected by TB, the reason we signed that document was because we just had one request, and it's very straightforward and transformative. Pregnant and lactating women must be included in TB research by default, not as an exception. So for far too long, we have been systemically excluded from clinical trials and research under the banner of protection, resulting in dangerous knowledge gap that actually increases harm. The status quo of exclusion isn't protecting us at all. It's forcing healthcare providers to make treatment decisions for us without evidence, potentially harming the very people they claim to protect. In addition to morbidity and mortality, women face mental health issues, including postpartum depression, when, for example, you're asking yourself if the breast milk you're giving your child has TB medication and to what quantities, and what would be the effect on the child who doesn't have TB. So specifically, we are asking for early inclusion in the research pathway, which we think is very vital, especially if we can be included in phase 2 clinical trials once initial safety data is established, rather than waiting until phase 4 when drugs are already in the market. We are also asking for client-centered protocols that consider our unique needs, such as pregnant and lactating women, along with proper safety monitoring that does not automatically exclude us. We are calling for ethical frameworks that view exclusion as an ethical issue, particularly when it results to treatment that lacks evidence. We are also asking for dedicated funding streams that should be allocated specifically for research that addresses TB in pregnancy and lactation, as we experience unique psychological changes that may affect drug metabolism, as was said earlier. Community engagement is critical, and we hope that women who are pregnant and breastfeeding can be included in those conversations, from protocol design to the dissemination of results. So we want to build trust. We want to build trust with researchers. We want to have an authentic partnership that is not tokenistic, based on our experiences. So we want to be engaged in the conception of research. We want to ask questions. We want to be asked questions. We want a research team to communicate to us openly about risks, benefits, uncertainties, and the rationale behind study designs using clear and very understandable language. We want research literacy that we can share with our peers, that is simplified, that enables our communities to understand the kind of research that is happening, and also learn about, and also for researchers to learn about our priorities. We want to contribute. We want to be the researchers' partners. We want a transparent process that voices our concerns during research with genuine pathways for resolving our issues. We want also that the findings be shared with us who are participating in accessible formats, demonstrating how our contribution have advanced the knowledge. We want the research questions reflecting on what communities consider important and not merely on what researchers find interesting. So to drive a genuine systemic change on how we approach TB research for pregnant and lactating women, we need to be keen to ensure that women are not just recipients of the research, but also participants in equal measure. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you. So I hope, Madame, this goes a certain part of the way to be talking about how we think about ethical inclusion of, and what's the ethical inclusion? What are the ethical ways of taking a look at this in the idea of protecting women from research and protecting women with research and including people in the overall engagement in research. And very much, I will bring this now to Alexandra Calmi. Given that this, in working in HIV research, this has been cutting edge work in pregnancy and lactation. So Alexandra, pregnant and lactating women have been excluded from research, exactly as we've talked about, in the fears of harming the mother and the baby. Yet, exactly as Maureen just spoke about, we know that this also, and also HRP, we know that this pushes this now, the risk into the community, into an uncontrolled environment. So HIV has made important steps in this arena. Can you please talk further about how to involve pregnant and lactating women ethically in clinical research?
Thank you very much. I think I may try to build on what Maureen just said, because it is very important. So clearly, you shift away the risk from a controlled environment to an uncontrolled environment. But who is in this uncontrolled environment? It's routine clinical care. And it is a decision that we clinicians and patients take together on an everyday basis. So what we do say to women is that, okay, there were no clinical trials, but in our booklet, you know, the drug booklet that we use every day, it's written, but you can still prescribe if the benefit outweighed the risk. This is what is written now everywhere. No one is convinced, nor the prescriber, nor the women. So what we did in Geneva, we did a small survey to see whether really women were so much, you know, untrusted to enter into clinical research. We did a big survey, we published it. And what was really amazing is that in no way during the focus group, never, the women mentioned the fact that they wouldn't want to enter clinical trials because they fear of pregnancy or risk of fetus, etc. The only thing that we're really into this focus group were, okay, well, that's not very convenient because you asked me to come at 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. and blah, 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 and that is not really convenient for my daily life. So it comes back to your first sentence from Franklin Roosevelt that you have to include research into the daily life and into the routine. You cannot just make two different worlds. That doesn't work at all. So that was just my introduction. And then also why HIV, indeed, HIV has been at the forefront, and I may start with reminding that AZT was used in the early 90s to prevent the HIV transmission from the mother to the baby at a time where, you know, no one knew about whether it would work and how safe it was. So I think the HIV community has been also very vocal, because the PPI, the patient public involvement, was a reality since many years. It did not start 2 years ago. It's really a reality since a long time. And so with this WHO and impact workshop activities that were led, especially by Martina Penazzato here, but by many people that are not in this room, but some of them are, there were many very practical ways how to include in HIV research women in research. And maybe I would like to concentrate on one for the question of time. One was that women becoming pregnant in trial can consent to stay on trial. No one forces them to stay, but they can consent to be in the trial. And I think this was done already in several clinical studies. It works, like women are entrusted to stay with the same researcher and the same doctors and nurses, and it works. And it avoids things that are much more dangerous, like shifting a drug or changing the study drugs or the treatment regimen to a woman because she's pregnant. And I think this is much more dangerous than having a consent form that is, you know, seen by the ethical committee, that is signed, where everyone understands the risks and the benefit, rather than saying, oh, somewhere it is written in the book that you may take it if the benefit outweighs the risk. So I would say that this is really important. And I may just end, because you mentioned the COVID. And I would like to give you an example in COVID. So in the COVID period, we set up a trial, the COPEP trial, assessing the use of lopinavir-ritonavir to prevent the COVID transmission as a PEP, if you want. So lopinavir-ritonavir is a drug that is used in HIV since 20 years, that is given to children, to women, to pregnant women with no risk at all. When we did this trial, we had the request from the ethics committee to a male condom, double contraception in women, and no women in reproductive age for COVID. Can you imagine? It's just ridiculous for a drug that everyone knew since 25 years. So yes, activism is still needed because sometimes we have obstacles that we cannot control. Ethics committee, everyone with very good intention, but that making a lot of harm. So yes, activism is still very well needed, and thank you, Maureen, for raising this. Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent. I was just before this panel was actually facilitating another panel on universal health coverage and women, and keeping women in the center of UHC. And please, if you do want to come in, there's still a few seats at the very front. Okay, very good. I don't need mine, for example. I'm standing here, and they didn't give me a big stool. The activism is one of these things, indeed, one of the most important things that ever happened in research and medical work was the activism of the HIV activists, who now, where the TB activists are now saying, we need this information back to us in ways that we can understand, so that we can continue to consent, so we can continue to be part of this work. So while we may be talking to a very technical audience here, activism, community engagement, civil society, super important. Let's shift a moment from conditions that may affect women to conditions that are pregnancy related, and we'll shift to Metin, please. How has Concept Foundation driven progress in the area of clinical trials and pregnancy? How can the problems of a weak market, which we just heard here, and we just heard here about questions about a weak market, how can incentives be brought forward, and how do we deal with the perceived risk and liability involving pregnant women? How can we overcome that?
Thank you. In the Eurovision Song Contest.
I was going to say that.
21. We started a project. It started with a wish to update a 2008 seminal paper published by Nicholas Fiske and Rifat Hatun, looking at maternal health medicines in development. What is the sort of landscape? And they had identified 17 drugs at the time. And we said, let's try to replicate that analysis. And then it kind of grew. And then we had the partnership with Impact Global Health, which at the time was called Polycurious Research, and Burnett Institute. So we started this project basically looking at what are the drugs, biologicals being investigated for specific pregnancy conditions. And we developed the timelines with Impact Global Health. We then developed target product profiles to see what is the need, how do we want these drugs to look like, to see whether the pipeline drugs match those. And then we also attempted to do a market analysis about barriers and so on. So a lot of these things are kind of known in terms of the market dynamics and why pharmaceutical industry is not investing and why we are not getting new drugs. What we found in the pipeline was, as Cecile just presented, lots of trials, lots of drugs, a lot of noise, and not a sort of planned, programmed drug development activity. And that is also indicated in the 71% repurposed drugs. And repurposing is sometimes good, but it's not always the sort of best strategy. I think one issue is obstetric researchers or obstetric community, maternal health community, hasn't articulated the message well. And that has many reasons. But one thing is we haven't really articulated what are the consequences of not including pregnant and lactating women in trials. And just about a week ago, 3 weeks ago, there has been a publication in Annals of Internal Medicine. It's called Sins of Omission. And this is a paper from a US academic group looking at thalidomide, COVID-19 vaccines, and dolutegravir, the HIV medicine. And basically saying thalidomide was assumed beneficial and given without the research. And do you know how many thalidomide victims are there? It's about 8,000. And then they calculated based on the adverse event risk and so on. If we had conducted a randomized trial that included 200 women in the thalidomide group, we would have ended up with 33 cases. Mm. So, this is a very stark example of not including. And then there are other examples where we haven't done the due work needed. And I always relate to the pediatric field as kind of guiding us in this field. Pediatricians, for some reason, are better researchers than obstetricians, I have to admit. But in 2006, European Medicines Agency passed a rule called PIP, Pediatric Investigation Plan. And I think one of the architects is in the room here. And that basically mandates that if any drug has a possibility of being used in children, then children should be researched, or that drug should be researched in children. And I think what we need and what we haven't done is a maternity investigation plan, exactly replicating that approach, because otherwise companies on their own are not going to come. So we need both a stick and a carrot. The stick needs to be bigger. Carrot can be small, but I think we probably need both. Maybe carrot could be giving another 5 years of intellectual property protection or something like that. But there are ways of doing this, and we haven't done it so far.
Excellent, thank you. while it may be that gynecologists or obstetricians are lesser researchers, I will say that one of the most impressive things I found by being on the board of the Concept Foundation is the degree to which obstetricians and gynecologists are advocates for their patients and are prepared to in fact assume an enormous amount of risk with unknown drugs in order to manage this work. And this was eye-opening for somebody who had been only in infectious disease. It's really quite remarkable the amount of risk that the profession has taken on, and which we should not require of them as a profession. So let me move to Miriam Al-Gholoul, my colleague. Miriam, how does MMV's Malaria and Mothers and Babies initiative work from end to end to de-risk products and to think about how we can most effectively have medicines that are effective for women who have malaria and are pregnant?
Hello?
Wait, so much.
So I would like to start by saying the obvious. Maternal health actually concerns each and every one of us, simply because we're all the outcome of a pregnancy, right? So whether you experienced it yourself or whether you've supported your wife, your daughter, your sister through it, you may know the anxiety that comes with needing a medication while you're pregnant. And we've heard it already. I mean, how do you make an informed decision when no data is available? How do you deal with the drug label stating must be used only if the benefit outweighs the risk? What does it mean? So at MMV, we've decided to change that. And this is when 5 years ago, we've launched the Malaria in Mothers and Babies Initiative, MIMBA, which means Swahili, pregnancy in the Swahili language, sorry. And it aims at serving women in general, but most particularly pregnant and lactating mothers at risk of malaria. It has an end-to-end strategy from preclinical to access, and I'm going to briefly touch on 4 of its main components. So starting with the start, non-clinical, under the leadership of Belen Tornesi, we are now using early screening models to evaluate the teratogenic potential of new molecules before it gets to the clinic. So from day one, we ask ourselves, could this molecule has potential for all populations? On the modeling side, we made also huge progresses thanks to Nada Ablagaiser, who is in the room here. And actually for pregnant women, we use mathematical model to evaluate if a dose adjustment is deemed necessary. You've heard from Mariana, there's a lot of physiological changes, so it's important to have an idea of whether an adjustment would be required or not. And in lactation, these models also help us predict if the drug will get into the breast milk, and it gives also an idea of the milk to plasma ratio. So these tools are extremely informative for development and dosing strategies. We've talked already a bit on clinical research here with Alexandra and Metin, but I would like to talk a bit more about the first trimester. We all know that research in pregnancy is rare, but the paucity of data in the first trimester is even worse. Important to note that when we think about first trimester, actually the target population may be larger because generally in early stage of pregnancy, or the woman doesn't know that she's pregnant, or she decides to not disclose her status. So basically data generated in the first trimester are also beneficial to any woman of reproductive age with unknown pregnancy status. So we felt that it was important to fill this gap with antimalarials, and we launched the MIMBA Pregnancy Registry in collaboration with the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine to gather informations from inadvertent exposure during the first trimester. And we are quite proud because this is a unique project on the African continent, and it actually generated data which paved the way to the Sapphire clinical trial, which is a first of its kind trial, platform adaptive trial in the first trimester of pregnancy, where we screen women for pregnancy, we screen them for malaria, and we treat her intentionally in the context of a clinical trial. So you heard with Maureen about the importance of community engagement, and it has played a key role with community health workers consenting more than 50,000 women for the MIMBA registry. And it's also a key piece of work led by Maud Majares-Lugan as part of the Sapphire trial, where we are involving women and communities to understand potential barriers, but facilitators also to recruitment. And these data are informing the recruitment strategy for Sapphire as we speak. On the access side, it's extremely important to ensure that affordable and accessible drugs of good quality are available, and ideally locally. So this is why MMV has collaborated with 3 manufacturers in Africa, in Kenya and Nigeria, namely, to obtain the WHO pre-qualification of sulfadoxine pyrimethamine, a treatment which is recommended for the prevention of malaria during pregnancy. So I'm looking at my colleagues in the room here, and I think they would all agree to say that we are quite proud of all the work, all the advances that have been made. And with knowledge sharing and sustainability in mind, these strategies, these tools, these infrastructures could and should be leveraged by other other researchers in different therapeutic diseases. So I think, yeah, we did a lot. We've shown that it's possible, but let's be clear, we're not doing that alone. We cannot do that alone. We need all of you guys to move past fear, move past exclusion by default, because, yeah, health of mothers is the foundation of the health of nations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariam. I think this is a really important moment to note that some of the places where this can work is actually in the areas where there's massive public health need and very little profit to be made, because this is the place where work can be done in a way that actually allows the space to open. I think often in neglected disease and maternal health and so forth, we feel quite like we're oppressed in all of this, but actually we're a space in which innovation can properly happen because of the concerns of profitability are somewhat less. So one of the most absolutely fundamental partners in all of this are the regulatory authorities, absolutely without a doubt. Not only as people who stand over top and say you may or may not do this, but as partners in thinking about how clinical trials are designed, how they come in the community, and what do you do. And Ian, I understand that the National Drug Authority in Uganda is the only regulatory agency on the African continent with explicit guidelines for the involvement of pregnant women and lactating mothers in clinical trials. Can you please explain to us why Uganda adopted these guidelines in 2023? What changed from the previous guidelines, and what are the expected benefits? Please, thank you, Ian.
Thank you. Again, greetings from the Uganda National Drug Authority. And I just wanted to give you a small background. So the National Drug Authority began the process of developing these guidelines in 2019. At the time, we had approximately 336 maternal deaths for each 100,000 live births. And this was just only in 2019, which is fairly high. And, you know, you've mentioned obstetric bleeding, high blood pressure, and infections were some of the leading causes. And the challenge was that various medications are used in pregnancy or lactating women, and yet there was lack of data in this population. And treatment and dosing strategies are mostly based on standard doses, despite the fact that all these are determined in healthy and mostly male individuals. So this often, again, as mentioned, it overlooked the gestational physiological changes that occur in pregnancy. And this also was not able to speak to the medications exposure in lactating women and who have neonates, and neonates at the same time they have different absorptive challenges because they're also only developing. So we found that all of these things together were creating a regulatory gap for us. So there were barriers to obtaining information, again, and this was based on protecting women from the clinical trial related risks. And so we still found that there was very limited information about the products that were already being used anyway, because we are still, whenever they would get nausea, they'll still have to get some kind of medicament to alleviate nausea. So we also at the time, we also were aware that pregnancy often comes with medical needs, and it also has a financial implication, even when it's well planned. But we found that in Uganda, there were young women who had economic challenges, and a number of women had challenges. And this predisposes them to a lot of hearsay and unwanted experiences with unproven medicines. So it was therefore necessary to collect this data in a controlled setting of a clinical trial to ensure that because in the clinical trial, there's a lot of safety that can also inform their clinical care. We also decided, in coming up with the guidelines, we again utilized obstetricians, pediatricians, and some other regulators from the ethics side to come up with a guideline. And then we had other stakeholders. We convened a meeting after the document was drafted, and then they were able to incorporate community perspectives, researchers' propositions, and also to incorporate the health system aspects so that the guidelines were more holistic. Then these guidelines, we found that these guidelines have been useful to both regulators, researchers, and sponsors alike. When a sponsor has an interest in bringing a trial over, they kind of have an idea of our regulatory landscape, and then it helps them to put their documentation together. They have been specifics on how to approach the research design. There have been, we've adopted what we call the AVAREF guidelines. That's for Uganda. So AVAREF is, the African Vaccines Regulatory Forum, and many of you probably know it's part of, know about it, but they have review forms that we have adopted as part of maturity levels for most of the national regulatory agencies. But with our guidelines, this has been able to enhance the review specificity to pregnancy and lactating women. So it is expected that the body of the evidence, especially reference safety information for the interventions that are used in pregnancy will improve. And it also has enhanced the multidisciplinary regulatory reviews, such that before, a lot of the trials were being looked at from a conventional clinical trials framework review. But when you have pregnancy and lactating women, then you have a multidisciplinary team where you're able to incorporate a technical advisory committee with obstetricians and pediatricians, just to make sure that the safety, the efficacy, and the monitoring is well done. So I guess these guidelines have been able to reinforce the role of the regulator's vantage position of neutrality, because in all of this, the regulator is often seen as a neutral person, and they're able to objectively seek scientific and ethical interventions to improve the outcomes for pregnant women and lactating mothers. Regulators also often trusted to communicate reliable information, and these guidelines place regulators in a better position to sensitize about research in pregnancy and lactating women. Thank you.
Very much. So it's possible it's happening. I think this is one of the things that's super important for us to keep our ears to the ground, to continue to sharing with one another, because this work is happening in various places. And I think there are many people who've been involved in this space for a very long time, and there can be a frustration, and it feels like things are moving slowly, but things are moving, and it's extremely exciting. Okay, so I'm going to just give a very quick sort of 90-second opportunity for each of the panelists to just say, what do we need next to drive progress? And Ian, I've sent you last each time. Do you want to go first this time? Just to give us an answer to, very quickly, from your perspective, what's next needed to drive progress for more inclusive research for maternal health?
So thank you for that. So as countries contribute to the finalization, especially I noticed we haven't spoken about the ICH E21 guidance, but I know it's ongoing. And I think it's important to have perspectives from more countries, from all the countries, even in those areas where there's not much data. And this is because, again, as Miriam mentioned, maternal mortality and morbidity ultimately affects everyone. And considering this task can not only be achieved by regulators or even just everyone in the room there is very important. So it's not a one-person thing. If everyone comes together, then there is a better opportunity, because we're talking about we're talking about our mothers, our sisters, our daughters. So it's really an important mission, and we cannot miss out on the opportunity of having more regular meetings between researchers, regulators, sponsors, and policy advocates to also share each other's perspectives, but then also to share lessons learned from successful research, for instance, if it's a successful research, and even to share the challenges that may have happened on the way. So that's my thinking. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Metin.
So I mentioned the maternity investigation plan as one avenue that I think is doable. It requires some political movement to force it through. But I think the science is clear. Exclusion is clearly harmful. I think we can document that, and there's evidence for that. What we don't have, I think, is the demand. And that demand, especially from countries where the research is conducted, the maternal morbidity, mortality burden is high. I don't see that there at the moment. So I think we do need advocacy. We do need countries with high burden of ill health to step up and say, this is an important area, and if we are going to improve the health of our pregnant lactating populations, we need to include them in the trial. So I think we need more activist type advocacy, and it has to be in your face, and it needs to be there until changes happening.
Okay, so is anyone volunteering for in-your-face advocacy at the moment? You're retiring. You get to. I nominate you. Maureen.
So I'm really excited with 30 of us virtual, people in the room in this rainy Geneva, and quite positive remarks about inclusion of women, pregnant and breastfeeding women in research. I'm really, really excited, and I'm hoping that this conversation doesn't end at the cocktail, and that the organizers will keep this positive momentum and make hay when the sun shines. So the fundamental system change we seek is a paradigm shift from viewing us as vulnerable population to be excluded, to recognizing that proper protection comes only through inclusive, ethical research that generates the evidence needed for safe and effective care. So we are repeating again that this is not merely a scientific or medical issue. It's a matter of gender equity, human rights, and social justice. When we exclude pregnant and lactating women from research, we send a message that their health is secondary. Our advocacy demands that our health be centered, our voices be amplified, our rights to evidence-based research be carefully realized. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Maureen, I promise you it's not going to end at the cocktail, and hopefully at the next time we have a cocktail, you'll be with us. Do it. Yes.
Thank you.
Alexandra.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I think we need to continue because we have started and we have example of good practices. For example, with the lenacapavir, this antiretroviral drug that is so efficient to prevent HIV acquisition. So I think this is the first thing. Second, we have to involve patient, public, not only the patient, but also the public, because it goes beyond pregnant women and lactating women. It goes to every woman in childbearing age. And I have seen data from even the HIV science when you have only data from very young women or very old women and men. So this really doesn't work. It doesn't represent the patients that are at risk and who need this drug. And not only patient, pharma, patient and public, but also the pharma and the ethics committee. I provided you with this example of this lopinavir. And I think the fact that we wanted to include women in childbearing age made a delay of 3 months. In the COVID period, that was really not acceptable, I would say, not acceptable at all, that we could not include women in childbearing age in a repurposed drug, you know, that is really, so involve the patient, the public, the pharma, it's really multi-stakeholder, and we have to continue with that. And I agree, continue to collect the models because it works. And there is no way for us to go back and not to go further with the inclusion of women. So yeah, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay. And Miriam?
What's left? I think there's so many things that we can do. Partnership is key, learning from each other's, bringing the pharmas in also as well. I think it's major. Favorable regulatory environment. I think Jan's presentation was extremely important, and Uganda is playing a role model here. We had a very cool convening with the Concept Foundation and 10 African regulators earlier this year in Kigali, where we discussed, you know, the inclusion of these populations in clinical research, and it was extremely enthusiastic to see that they're ready to be part of the solution and a global solution. So we've mentioned the ICH E21. Anyone can contribute when it's become public for comments. So please do share your feedback. It's an opportunity.
Would you repeat that, please, ICH?
The ICH E21 guideline. The draft will be posted anytime soon, right, Mariana? End of June. End of June. So stay tuned. It will be available, you know, online. Anyone can comment. Ethics committee. So we had this convening with regulators, but as part of the next steps, we also discussed to involve ethics committees to bring everyone to the same page. What else? Funding. I mean, yeah, we need funders. Are there any funders in the room? So it's a complex and multifactorial situation. So anyone who can do something, please do.
Excellent, thank you. If we can just thank our panelists for this. Yeah, very good. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're just running a little bit over. Joe, I think you're probably going to have to go with, would you like to have a moment now? Yes, if you just give me a moment to go off script ever so slightly, because we do have a representative from the UK FCDO here, but yes. And you can just come, yeah, you can, because I don't think I have a hand. It's off script, but she has to get to the airport right this moment. So I
have to get to the airport this moment, but this is really important. I don't know what to say, actually. This is Joe Mulligan. Yeah, I'm Joe Mulligan. Sorry. I'm Joe Mulligan. I'm the head of global health research at the UK Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. We are long time supporters of MMV and HRP, really proud to support them, really proud to support them in this work, really inspirational organisations. I do want to sort of say thank you, actually, because I thought I'd have to rush off. I've got a moment. But really thank you for the insights and engagement today. I think the one thing I've taken away from this is that our discussions have made it clear that including pregnant women in clinical research from the start is not just necessary, it is urgent. It is absolutely fundamentally urgent. And what's really been great about today is just seeing how we're beginning to reverse the trends of exclusion. And I think we've just seen, particularly the projects, the MIMBA project, the Sapphire trial, just real sort of tangible examples of that. Other things that I've taken away is that, you know, it's not just, you know, this is about collaborations between researchers, funders, governments, in-your-face advocates. That's a word, that's a phrase I'm now going to take back with me. So thank you for that. And only by working together can we, you know, and regulators and communities as well, but only by working together can we ensure that sort of science really sort of translates into to impact and ensure that no woman is left behind. So all I'm going to say is I'm going to leave this meeting. Let's leave this meeting with a renewed commitment to drive innovation, to close these really critical evidence gaps, and to put maternal health where it belongs, at the centre of global health agendas. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the session. Thank you.
We are running a little bit on push, and we have a very, very important announcement to come now from Martina Penezzato. Martina is a medical doctor and researcher at WHO. I know her well from her work at the Global Accelerator for Pediatric Formulations, which has been a remarkable success in this arena around, but in the movement of an unseen population into a place where we have proper movement here. So Martina is going to talk to us about how we're going to join forces to amplify action and deliver. And Martina has to leave right as she finishes, because her event is up the hill. So then we'll call on His Excellency from Sudan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that kind introduction. I think we're trying to put up the slides. Great. Thank you. First of all, on behalf of WHO, thank you very much to the organizers for allowing us to contribute to this important event. This is very much an agenda that we care deeply about. And I think that there's a number of opportunities that have presented themselves most recently. Okay, perfect. Yes, good. At WHO, we've had a great opportunity over the last 2 years to really dovetail an important and broader agenda that was prompted by the clinical trial resolution to strengthen the clinical trial ecosystem globally. And that resolution has triggered an important body of work that our colleague Vasi, I don't know if he's in the room or online, is leading on. And as part of this work, the first ever guidance for best practices for clinical trials was published last year with a component related to pregnant lactating women. A framework for strengthening the clinical trial ecosystem has been put out to support countries. And as you can see there is a clear acknowledgement of underrepresented population, including pregnant lactating women. And most recently in April, there was the launch of the Global Action Plan that includes a number of actions to strengthen the clinical trial ecosystem, including addressing the needs of underrepresented populations. So clearly there is a window of opportunity, and we at WHO felt that it was important to build on the great work that we've heard today is already happening out there, and trying to really capitalize on that by finding efficiencies, ways of working together and joining forces. And so we decided to set up an internal, initially, task force with really the vision of transforming this area of work over the next few years, of course, in conjunction with our partners and all the stakeholders that are very active and lead important work in this space. And we put forward a vision with a number of strategic objectives that I'm going to go through very quickly, starting, of course, from the need to really inform better and timely inclusion of pregnant lactating women by understanding better where the gaps are and what needs to happen in specific disease areas that may have not had the type of work that we've heard today, but also providing important guidance, like in the form of the guidelines that we release, but also additional pieces of information, including resource toolkits that can support those researchers out there that do want to contribute to this agenda, but might not know how to do that. And then committing to proactive monitoring of the progress that we can make in this space, knowing that a lot of it has not been looked at in the past, and we definitely need to move forward in this way, because what gets measured gets done. So the second strategic objective is obviously creating an enabling environment by working with all those actors that are out there and have a critical role to play. We've heard the critical role and central role of the community, the important partnership that we need to build with industry in acknowledging some of the challenges, yet in pushing the envelope to what can be done sooner. And then really working with regulators, building on ICH and additional work to foster alignment, but push the envelope perhaps, and trying to think about a maternal investigation plan and beyond. And then the ethics review board, key actors on the ground. We've heard that very clearly. And also how we need to think about how to mobilize resources and set up policies that can be enabling of this work more globally. So obviously, this is an important work that we at WHO also use as an opportunity to align internally, to join forces across a number of technical departments, again, building on the work and expertise that some of the disease departments had already championed, and perhaps to take it to areas where perhaps that work hasn't happened yet, and to develop a bit of a unified voice with that. And we know that none of this can happen without the key leaders out there, that many of which we've mentioned in the panel and beyond, that are already taking the lead in a number of different disease areas and work, and making sure that we build partnerships and take this forward very concretely, learning from their own experiences and cross-fertilizing as much as possible, and really advocating collectively. Clearly, these task force has now really evolved to bring in important actors in this space. We have a number of product development partnerships that have already an important track record in this space, and others that are very interested to generate additional work. But ultimately, we really look forward to bring others at the table and make sure that everyone has expertise to offer and interest to take this agenda forward, join our effort, because as some of you have said already, there is clearly a window of opportunity. There's a lot of seeds that have been planted, lots of solutions already been tested. And now is the time to join forces and really move that needle from theory to action, because the action is actually happening often already. So I'll stop there and just really look forward to have more of you getting involved with the task force. And please do reach out to Mariana and I, who are responsible for this effort, but just to acknowledge the colleagues in WHO that, of course, are quite involved with this and very active, leading various components of the work that I mentioned in my slide. So I'll stop there, and thank you again for allowing us to contribute and officially launch this effort that we hope will be as collaborative as possible.
Be able to provide one opportunity for one more intervention from His Excellency Dr. Awadallah. Is he here? No, from Sudan. No, okay. This is great. So you can't see this is a whole like it's like the airlines are coming in. No, it's not happening. So okay, so this is fine. That's me, because I don't mind doing improv. All right, so this means that we've come to the end of our session. For me, at least, I feel a lot of energy here, and it's really very exciting. It's very exciting to see so many of you, and it's also wonderful to hear these kinds of words like interdisciplinary at the same time as we're talking about rigorous, to say ethical at the same time as we're talking about no longer talking about vulnerable populations, but we're talking about special populations. We're talking about in-your-face advocacy. At the same time as we're talking about very strong ways of thinking about, these are medicines that are going to people. This is to women, to children, to communities. This is a wonderful and fertile and exciting space. And it's a crucial space for us to continue to work in. Earlier today, when I was moderating this piece for civil society, one of the things that I said about being in civil society is that we're all in civil society. Every single one of us is engaged in this kind of activity in some place or another. And one of the wonderful parts about civil society is that it provides connection, which is a basic human need. and connection that's also provides momentum. Not only provides the way of us being able to have the cocktails and to feel wonderful, but actually to see the movement happening, and the movement is happening. So I want to just take a moment to thank the governments who came, to thank the WHO who came, to thank the researchers who came, to thank the NGOs. Those of you who may be the really loud activists, you can identify yourselves later. There's a few minutes of, we'll be moving around, and then there's a cocktail next, and I do hope you'll spend a few moments. Please do also, as MMV is pulling all of this together, we've put together a little survey here because we need to know who you are so we can continue to connect to you. We'd like to know what you think, what you want to do, how you want to be involved. What you thought was terrible, that's okay. I'll take ownership. What you thought was great, how you'd like to keep coming, because we'd like to continue to help us all show up in the places that we need to. So if you just take a moment, that's a little QR code that you can take photographs. And otherwise, I will end this with a wish for all of you to have a wonderful rest of your WHA, to please continue your activism, your research, your regulatory work, all for the benefit of the populations that matter to us so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cocktails back here is the, yes. Okay, and some people are going to move quickly to the, yeah.